If you've ever watched pro play, you've probably noticed that pros play very differently in ranked compared to actual matches. In pro play, teamwork is critical, and the level of strategy is extremely intricate. But when they hop into a ranked game, they do stuff that's a lot more simple, yet it still works perfectly fine in a ranked setting. For that reason, pros have no problem reaching Radiant in spite of the fact that they spent most of their day in scrims or doing other things. Hey guys, it's Konpeki here, and in today's video, I'll be going over 5 important tips that pros use in the ranked games, and I'll teach you how you can easily copy them to put into your own ranked games. However, if you need more hands-on help to implement these tips and your rank is at least silver, my team of Radiant and VCT coaches can help you rank up 500 RR in just 10 weeks, guaranteed, or you get your money back inside the Immortal Roadmap program. You'll be getting over 100 hours of personalized coaching with hands-on drills, scrims, one-on-ones to make sure you learn everything you need to hit Immortal Plus. So if you're serious about putting in the work to see results like some of our players, and you want to work with world-class coaches like Milan, who won champs in 2021, click the link in the description below to book a free call with a coach to see if we'd be a good fit. Hurry, because the next season of our program starts next week and the spots are limited. Now, back to the video. The first tip that I want to introduce might surprise you because it's about over-rotating on defense. Over-rotating or carelessly rotating too many players sound bad on paper, and it's really bad in pro play, but it actually happens to work really well in ranked. Just look at what Team Liquid's Nats does in this clip. At the start of the round, he places a trip to hold mid so that his team doesn't have to spend too many resources on it. After which, he puts down a trip and cage to hold down B main and also places a camera on the B main entrance to get some early info. Once the round starts, he quickly goes on his cam. And when he doesn't see anyone standing there right away, he and literally all of his teammates immediately start sprinting towards the A site, leaving both B and mid completely empty. Now, this looks a bit silly, and maybe it is a little bit, since Nats would never ever do this in a professional match. After all, enemies might be faking a site, they might hide from the cam for a while, or they might just be working mid. In a professional match where map control is everything, enemies are likely to be communicating, and they're also very much able to go for elaborate strategies. So over rotations wouldn't end well. But in ranked, it's actually fine. The more complicated you make your plays without proper practice, the more likely it is for things to go wrong. So more often than not, no matter what rank it is, players tend to go for very simple strategies like 5-man rushes. And that's exactly why Nats often over-rotates, because it counters rushes really well. Now the reason I picked out this round in particular is because due to it being later into the half, Nats' opponents have already recognized that he has a habit of doing this. Nats used this strategy in Pistol, did it again in round 2, repeated it in the 3rd round, and also did it in the 4th round. And when we finally got to round 5, which is the clip I showed you earlier, the enemies adapted and hid from the cam for 2 seconds, after which they ran straight into B. Now, I think it's fair to say that Nats wasn't exactly hiding what he was doing here. He was not too worried about being countered because in his mind, if he loses one round because the enemies countered his over-rotation habit, he'd still likely win at least 2 or 3 rounds by cheating extra rotations over in the rounds before. And remember, just because the enemies get B doesn't mean that the round is automatically lost. Since it's still a 5v5 retake, the defenders may be at a disadvantage, but it's not one that can't be overcome. Because of that, Nats and his teammates actually play the retake perfectly, and they win the round anyway. And to make things worse for the enemy team, Nats doesn't even stop over-rotating in the rounds after this. Now, before you 5-stack every site in all of your ranked games, it's important to realize that the Cypher, or at the very least, any info gathering sentinel utility is really important here. By placing his trips and cam, Nats is able to hold half of the map on his own without even being there. So if you have nothing to hold the flank or give you some sort of info on the other side of the map, it becomes really difficult to actually execute these over rotations because before you know it, you can be getting flanked in your own spawn. But if you're a sentinel player yourself or your sentinel teammate is able to hold down a lot of space, try to take some of the freedom that offers you because it can easily win you rounds, especially if your enemies aren't playing super fake heavy plays. Okay, next up, I want to show you something that I saw from Tenz. That's because in this round, Tenz basically won his team the eco round by both hitting a nice shot, as well as having really clever utility usage. Starting off the clip, we see Tenz and his teammates fighting for rubble control on Lotus. The enemy team has both a Neon and a Gecko, so they're coming out strong with both stuns and a Dizzy. Since Tenz is the best candidate for making space, he dashes out to rubble, and that way dodges the Dizzy flash at the last second. After this, he re-swings the Neon and headshots her, at which point the enemy Jet also gets involved in the fighting. Now, because the Jet is close to the wall, Tenz recognizes that he can use his smokes as mobile one-ways. First, he clears a right angle, And now that he knows the Jet is stuck on the left side, he uses his second smoke to one-way Jet again. Note how at this point, Tenz doesn't immediately swing out. The enemy Jet is in a pretty bad position, so it's likely she's going to try and fight her way out. This becomes especially true when the Gecko Molly comes in, at which point it's run or die for the enemy Jet. Now sure, Tenz may have gotten 2 kills, including the final one where he flanks the enemy Killjoy. But if we break it down, he first made a lot of space with his dash, then opened the round with one important kill on the Neon, and finally put the nail in the coffin by ending the enemy Jet with great utility usage as well. So even if you're not a Jet player, there are 2 main takeaways here. First, get really comfortable with using your utility. Very often, people panic and end up taking bad fights, even though they had plenty of util they otherwise could have used. When Tenz saw the Jet, he could have just swung the Jet and prayed he'd hit another nice shot like he did on Neon. But even though his aim is insane, he didn't rely on it and played it smart instead. So having good utility usage to fall back on can save your life more often than you might think. Second, try to learn from the way he creatively uses his util here, and create a mental playbook of plays you can use when you're in a pinch. Even if it was an eco round, Tenz was able to catch his enemies off guard with his quick thinking to easily win the round. Now, this next tip comes from Paper Rex's Forsaken, and I think this is a really important lesson for everyone who solo queues a lot. That's because Forsaken is playing Vice on Bind, and he's noticed that his random teammate Skye likes to play around Long a lot. Now, the Skye on Long is kind of a staple on Bind, but trying to go for this flash play too often gets a bit predictable. So instead of yelling at his teammate, Forsaken sees an opportunity here. His Skye can make the play she wants to make, but Forsaken builds on it by placing his flash on the corner here, waiting patiently, and then striking once he gets the opportunity. His Skye is first flashed by the enemy Skye, and when the friendly Skye goes for the re-peek with the flash, the enemies are already expecting it, so she gets killed. Now, this would have been real bad, but because Forsaken was ready for it, he uses his flash and counters the Long players completely by surprise and gets 2 easy kills. With B Long fully clear, Forsaken turns his attention to Hookah. He notices that the Clove goes for a desperate respawn, immediately punishes, and then he finally whips around to also cook the Vice jumping out of Hookah. Sure, he had some really nice shots, and he had a good flash placed on Long, but I think it's really important to highlight that Forsaken basically set up a perfect bait play without ever exchanging a single word with the Skye. So even though your teammates might be no-comming, it's still possible to play around them. And guess what? If you do get a bit lucky with your teammates, it's even easier to communicate and set up these types of plays on purpose, so make sure you're always on the lookout for them. Now, I know I've already talked a bit about rotations with Nats, and this is definitely a similar idea, but I also wanted to highlight something that I often see Sentinel's Zekken do in order to put himself into positions of impact where he can win his team rounds a lot more often. If you look at this clip, you might think that Zekken was just AFK, but that's not actually the case. He's sitting in spawn with his map opened up wide so that he can see when and where to rotate. And sure, he might not do this every round because often Zekken will push areas with teammates or go for specific plays, but this is something that he likes to go for when he doesn't really have one play in mind in particular at the start of the round. I mean, just look at how he played it a few rounds before. He starts off the round by almost leaving spawn to put a smoke outside of showers, after which he actually runs back towards B, then closes to A again, and he finally just freezes in place with his eyes locked on the minimap the entire time. The reason this play works so well is that it achieves a few things. First, he's making sure he can always be in the action no matter what. Even if his teammates aren't communicating footsteps, he's close enough to pull up in time for the hit. And second, he avoids having to gamble altogether. On Bind, you're usually making a small bet at the start of each round. On what site are you committing 3 players and which only gets 2? But by keeping 1 player in spawn, you almost have 3 players on both sites. Of course, the strategy works better on some maps than others. On a lot of maps, you rotate through mid, not spawn for one, but on a larger map like Pearl, it's also probably not worth doing this just because the rotations are so long. In any case, think about where you can best place yourself to get impact in your rounds, whether that's going for an aggressive play, rotating quickly like Nats, or even just sitting in spawn pretending to be AFK like Zekken. Now before I wrap things up, I want to show you one final tip on how Team Heretic's Benjyfishy approached this round and entry together with his Neon on Cypher. In this clip, Benji starts off the round by placing his camera to watch the B main entrance. Once the enemy Cypher peeks, he tags the defender with his camera, and Neon and himself realizes that this is their cue to speed up and punish the Cypher. Because Cypher is tagged by the camera, and Sunset B is a site where, at the start of the round, the second defender is usually in market to close the door, Cypher is basically forced to run back to try and remove the tracking dart. Because of this, Neon gets an easy kill, and Benji knows the main danger is on market, so he's free to path through the one-way cage like he does here, and after he gets out of main, notice that he goes straight into the smoke. But if you slow it down, you'll see that he does it in a very particular way. As he approaches the smoke, he moves his gun away from the smoke to make sure it doesn't stick out on the enemy screen. Then, once he gets ready to enter, he flicks his gun back towards the smoke to have his gun on target, and he briefly taps crouch to lower his head so he can see into the smoke slightly quicker. This might all seem like small things, but since someone was already in the smoke sitting and waiting, this extra advantage he gave himself could very much have made a huge difference. Now, after this, he does get a little bit unlucky because he gets spammed by the enemy Omen, but I still think there's something to be learned here about how quickly he reacted to an opportunity, as well as the smart way Benjyfishy deals with entering smokes. That'll be all. Thanks for watching.